As promised, here is my second video on the second period of time that Jesus mentions in Matthew chapter 24. Remember in verse 9, then they will deliver you, that's Christians, up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And he encourages us to endure to the end in verse 13, because we're going to face false prophets in verse 11 that is going to mislead many. Then he explains exactly what's going to happen in verse 15. He says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, or the disgusting thing that causes desolation, as spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in a holy place, let the reader of the Bible understand. So notice, it's something religious that stands in a holy place. That is what's disgusting. And it's disgusting to God and all true Christians. And Jesus tells us to flee because of what's coming. He says in verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, and no, and never will be again. And those days, he promises that he's going to cut them short, because no human or flesh would be saved. It's Christian flesh that's at stake. It's truth in or belief in Jesus Christ, because it's a holy thing that's going to take the place of Jesus, as we'll see later. Again in verse 23, it's religious, because he says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, don't believe it. It's not the real Christ according to Jesus. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And then Jesus gives us a warning. See, I have told you beforehand. Then he emphasizes it again and goes into a little bit more detail. So, if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Now, what do the Jews do in the wilderness? They sacrifice the red heifer. It becomes a carcass and it's burnt on the fire, and it stinks. Now, I want to show you what that word means. Abomination. An accursed thing. It says properly, what emits a foul odour and hence is disgustingly abhorrent, abominable, detestable, moral horror as a stench to God, like when people refuse to hear and obey his voice and sacrifice a red heifer sacrifice. The carcass is abhorrent to God Almighty. Now notice what they do. He says, in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say to you, look, he is in the inner room, do not believe it. So what did they do in the inner room? And what is the inner room? It's the inner room of the temple where they provide that sacrifice, which is in their eyes to cleanse. But to God it is abhorrent. Jesus is making it clear here. It's when the world turns against Christianity and puts up a false Christ, sacrificing a red heifer and building another temple. That's this period of time. It only lasts for a very short period of time because Jesus said it was cut short. And I will show you in another video what that period of time is. But for now, that's it. This is the next period of time, because that is called the Great Tribulation period. We've had the wars, which were the beginnings of pangs of distress, including the nuclear threat. Just pangs of distress. The tribulation is when a false Christ comes and they present this disgusting, abhorrent carcass in the wilderness. And Jesus in verse 28 says, wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be gathered. Vultures are unclean. It's abhorrent to God. The next period of time is this, in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation. So what's that period on about? We'll discuss that in my next video. Thank you.